He had been parked across the road from the church for 2 hours before anyone else arrived. December 1959, a country church 40 miles south of Abilene, Texas, third Sunday of Advent, and a tall man in a dark truck sat on the shoulder of an empty farm road, engine off, watching the gravel lot fill up one rattling pickup at a time, and he was crying, not sobbing, just sitting there, both hands on the wheel, with water running down a face that the whole country would have recognized if anyone had been close enough to see it. He wiped it once with the back of his hand. He did not get out. Whatever brought this man to a dying church in the middle of nowhere, it was not curiosity. He knew this place. You could see it in the way he looked at the crooked steeple, like a man looking at something he'd been carrying a long time, and finally sat down in front of. By 10:40, the lot was full. 41 people had come to watch their church die, because the notice had been nailed to the door for 2 weeks, and they had decided that if the doors of Mount Hebron Baptist were going to be chained shut today, they would be inside them when it happened. And at 11:20, a black sedan was going to turn into that lot. A man with a brass padlock was going to walk up the aisle, in the middle of worship, and lock the house of God over a debt of $1,100. Here is what nobody in that church knew, and what you don't know yet either. The stranger in the truck across the road was about to try to stop it, and the first thing he tried was going to fail. The cash in his coat was not going to be enough. Not because of the amount, because of something the banker knew that the stranger didn't. And here is the part that turns this from a story into a mystery. By the end of this morning, you will understand that this man did not stumble onto this church by accident. He was born 40 acres from it. Nobody recognizes him yet. Keep watching. The reason he came will not be what you think. Here is the story. Mount Hebron was built in 1931, the worst year of the Depression, by men who had no work and no money, and gave the only thing they had left, which was their hands. Reverend Eli Stroud raised the money for the land by passing a coffee can up the cotton rows for 2 years. 60 families gave what they could: a nickel, a dime, a laying hen, once, sold for 40 cents. Hold that detail. The hen, it comes back. For 28 years, that church held the county together. It married them and buried them and fed them out of its own cellar in the lean years. Then the cotton failed 2 years running, the county emptied out, and the collection plate went light as a feather. The building was paid for in sweat, but the land carried a note at the Farmers and Stockmen's Bank. $1,100 left. Reverend Stroud made every payment for 28 years. But in 1959, the bank was bought by new men, and the new men looked at 40 acres of roadfront Texas land, a cemetery they could move, a building they could clear, and they saw a filling station, commercial frontage on a road getting busier every year. They didn't see a church, so they called the whole note 30 days, and the bank's vice president, a trim, careful man named Carl Dunmore, made one decision that turned a foreclosure into something crueler. He didn't have to do it on a Sunday. He could have done it Monday, to an empty building. But he'd heard the congregation meant to fill the pews in protest, and Dunmore knew that a protest nobody stops just teaches everybody. It can't be stopped. So he chose mid-service, third Sunday of Advent, in front of the children. What Dunmore did not know, what nobody in that county knew anymore, because it was almost 30 years gone, was that one of the 60 families who'd put nickels in that coffee can in 1930 had a son. A boy who'd grown up 4 miles up the road, dirt poor, and left at 18 and never come back. That boy was sitting in a truck across the road right now, crying. Remember that. We'll get there. 11:20. The black sedan pulls into the gravel. Inside, Reverend Stroud hears it and does not stop preaching, but his voice tightens like a rope taking weight. The back doors open. Cold air rolls down the aisle. Carl Dunmore walks in with his hat on his head, in the house of God. That's the first thing 41 people notice. A leather portfolio under his arm and a brass padlock in his coat pocket. He isn't bothering to hide. Behind him, a young sheriff's deputy holding a folded order in both hands, looking like he'd rather be dead than here. Dunmore walks to the front. He sets the portfolio on the front pew. He sets the padlock on top of it, where everyone can see, and he takes a pocket watch out of his vest. Reverend, I'm sorry to interrupt. The foreclosure is effective today. I'll give your people 15 minutes to clear the building, and then the doors get chained. He glances at the watch. It's 11:20. At 11:35, the padlock goes on. Anything inside after that, the bank's not responsible for. 15 minutes. He says it like a man who has said it before. Old Reverend Stroud grips the pulpit. Mr. Dunmore, these are people at worship. It's the third Sunday of Advent. I'm asking you, one Christian to another, wait until Monday. My faith and my job aren't the same conversation, Reverend. And the old man opens his mouth to answer, and nothing comes out, because there's no scripture that makes $1,100 appear in 15 minutes. The congregation watches their preacher run all the way out of words, and a low sound goes through the room. Not a gasp, something worse. 41 people losing hope at the same time. 11:24. 11 minutes on the clock. That is when the back doors open again, and the cold comes down the aisle a second time. Where are you watching from this morning? Drop your state in the comments. And if you've ever sat in a room and watched the one person who was supposed to have the answer run completely out of answers, type Amen, so we know you're here. The tall man from the truck is walking up the center aisle. He's wiped his face dry, sheepskin coat, hat in his hand now. He took it off at the door, which Dunmore never did. His boots are loud on the plank floor in the silence. Past the families, past the children. He stops at the front pew, looks at the padlock for a long moment, and then at Dunmore. How much? Sir, this is bank business, the note, the whole thing. Today, how much? Dunmore checks his watch. 11:26, and decides answering is faster than arguing. $1,140 with cost. The man reaches into his sheepskin coat and takes out a long leather wallet, worn soft, and he counts $100 bills onto the lid of the church piano, out loud, slow, so every soul in the room hears the number climb. 1,100, 2 20s on top. 11:40. Mark the note paid, write the church a receipt, take your padlock and go. And the congregation breathes. You can hear it. 41 people exhaling at once. It's over. A stranger came. It's over. No, says Carl Dunmore. The room freezes. Put your money away, sir. Dunmore doesn't even look at the cash. The note isn't for sale to a third party. The bank doesn't have to accept payment from a man who isn't on the loan, and it won't. I checked the file this morning because I figured somebody might try exactly this. He almost looks sorry. The board wants the land, not the $1,100. They'd rather eat the debt and take the 40 acres than let some passing Samaritan hand them a check and keep a church sitting on commercial frontage. There's no clause that forces us to take your money. I'm sorry. The padlock goes on at 11:35. He puts his watch back in his vest, and the cash just sits there on the piano lid. $1,140. Useless. The stranger stands very still. For the first time, the man who came in so certain looks like a man who has hit a wall he did not expect, because he came here to pay a debt, and they just told him the debt was never the point. 11:29. 6 minutes. Here is the thing about the stranger, and you're about to learn it at the same moment Carl Dunmore does. He does not put the money away. He stands there, and you can see him thinking, fast, the way a man thinks when the front door's locked and he's running his hand along the wall for a window, and he asks a question that has nothing to do with money. You said the board wants the land, not the debt. That's right. Then the land's the asset, and an asset can be bought. He turns and looks, for the first time, not at Dunmore, but at the deputy by the door. Son, that order in your hands, does it say the bank's foreclosing on a debt, or does it say the bank already owns this parcel? The deputy looks down at the paper, swallows, says foreclosure, possession effective today. The bank don't own it yet. Takes effect at. He checks the order at the close of the eviction. When the building's cleared and the lock's on, the stranger turns back to Dunmore, and something has changed in his face. The wall has a window in it now, so until that padlock is on the door, this is still the church's land, and the church can still sell it to anyone, for any price, right now, this minute. He looks at Reverend Stroud. Reverend, I'll give you $2,000 cash on this piano for these 40 acres right now, while they're still yours to sell, and the first thing I'll do as the new owner is deed it straight back to this congregation free and clear, with no note and no bank, and no man with a padlock ever setting foot on it again. The room makes a sound. Carl Dunmore's mouth opens. You can't, I can. You just told me I can. You said there's no clause that forces you to take my money for the debt. You're right, so I'm not paying the debt. I'm buying the land out from under your foreclosure, before it closes, from the people who still legally own it. He's already counting. The second stack climbs beside the first. And there's not a clause in Texas that lets a bank stop a man from selling his own property 30 seconds before you take it. Is there, Mr. Dunmore? You'd know. You read the file this morning. Dunmore stares at $2,000 on a piano lid and at an old preacher with a pen already in his shaking hand, and he understands he has been beaten with his own answer. The clever thing he said to block the cash is the exact thing that just lost him the land. 11:33, 2 minutes, and nothing he can do with them. He looks up at the stranger's face. The light from the side window falls across it, and Carl Dunmore, like every man in Texas in 1959, has spent 100 Saturday nights in a movie house. He goes still. He knows that face. He holds a word in his mouth he suddenly understands he cannot say in this of all rooms. The stranger gives the smallest shake of his head. Don't. The deed is written on the piano lid. Signed by Eli Stroud, witnessed by a deputy who'd rather have been anywhere, paid in full in cash before the eyes of 41 people. And then, the same pen, the same piano lid, deeded right back to the trustees of the Mount Hebron Baptist Church. 2 transactions, 90 seconds. The land left the church and came home again before the ink dried, and there was nothing the bank could do but watch. Carl Dunmore picked his padlock up off the pew. It seemed to weigh more than when he carried it in. He put it in his pocket like a shameful thing, and at 11:35, the exact minute the doors were supposed to chain shut, he walked out the back of the church and took his hat off, finally on the way out the door. He could have driven on. He was passing through to a friend's place near San Angelo, taking the back roads. He could have never heard of Mount Hebron at all. Except, and this is the part the congregation didn't know yet, he hadn't been passing through. He'd driven 400 miles out of his way. He'd left a film set 2 days early and told no one where he was going, because a letter had reached him in California 3 weeks before from an old woman he'd never met, who'd gotten his address from a fan magazine and written it in a shaking hand. They're going to padlock the church your mother was baptized in. I thought you should know, in case it mattered to you. It mattered to her. That was the secret. That's why he was crying in the truck. That's why he knew the steeple. His mother, dead 20 years by then, had been one of the children carried to Mount Hebron in 1931. Her family was one of the 60. The laying hen sold for 40 cents to help buy the land. That was his grandmother's hen. He hadn't come to save a church. He'd come to pay back a 40-cent hen and a coffee can and a poor woman who'd walked her boy to a building where a poor family was worth exactly as much as a rich one. He just never told them. He decided, sitting in that truck, that if he said it, it would become his church, his story, and it wasn't. It was theirs. It always had been. The old reverend caught his arm before he reached the door. "Sir, these people can't ever pay you back. I don't even know your name. It's not a loan, Reverend. And the name doesn't matter." He looked back at the congregation, the families, the children, the cemetery through the side window. You had 60 families put nickels in a can to buy this ground. One of them sold a hen for 40 cents. You remember that hen? The old preacher blinked. "That's a story from before my time. How would a stranger know about the hen?" The tall man only smiled. Lucky guess, he crouched down to a little girl in the front row in her Sunday dress. "You sing in the Christmas program?" She nodded. "Then you sing loud this year. Loud enough I can hear it wherever I am. That's the only thing I'll ever ask anybody in this room." He asked the Reverend one thing on his way out. "Don't tell them my name, even if you work it out. The day they think it took somebody famous to save this church is the day they forget they built it. You tell them God sent a stranger. That's truer anyway." Then he was gone, and the truck was already turning west, and Reverend Stroud stood in the open door of a church that should have been chained shut, holding a deed, with a question he'd never get to ask. How did a stranger know about the hen? He'd figure it out eventually, but by then he'd promised to keep the secret, so he kept it. Have you ever watched the obvious answer fail and felt your stomach drop? Because if that didn't work, what's left? Have you ever needed someone to find the one window in a locked wall? And have you ever wondered how many strangers have stood up for you in rooms you weren't even in, paying back debts you never knew your family owed? Some men carry the padlock, and some men drive 400 miles to pay back a 40-cent hen and never tell you they did it. The doors of Mount Hebron never closed. The bank's new men sold out within a few years and moved on. Reverend Stroud preached 11 more years and was buried in the cemetery the bank had wanted to move. He kept the secret to his grave. God sent us a stranger. Though he'd worked out the truth about the hen and the mother and the boy who left at 18 and carried it quietly the rest of his life. The little girl in the Sunday dress, Ruth Ann Pickett, sang loud that Christmas and every Christmas after. She grew up and became the one who kept the church open 50 years through droughts and the slow emptying of the county, because she'd made a promise at 6 years old to sing loud enough that a tall man could hear her wherever he was, and she meant to keep singing until she was sure he had. Developers came again and again with more money than anyone there had ever seen for the 40 acres of frontage. Every time, the congregation said no, it's not ours to sell. A stranger bought it once, so it'd stay a church. We're not the generation that turns it into a filling station. When Ruth Ann finally retired in 2009, 50 years on, they restored the old building, and up in the steeple behind the bell they found a tin box wrapped in oilcloth. Inside, the deed with 2 transactions on it, 90 seconds apart in 1959, the brass padlock that never made it onto the door, and a letter in Reverend Stroud's hand. To whoever finds this, a stranger saved this church in 1959, not by paying our debt, the bank wouldn't take his money, but by buying our land out from under the foreclosure in the 90 seconds before it closed, and deeding it straight back to us. I have never seen a quicker mind or a quieter one. He asked me not to write his name. I won't, but I will write what I learned later, and never told a soul. He was not a stranger to this ground. His mother was carried to our cornerstone laying as a baby in 1931. His people were one of the 60. He did not come to save a church. He came home to pay a debt his family felt they owed, a coffee can and a hen sold for 40 cents. And he was too good a man to let us turn it into a story about him, so I'll tell you what he told me to tell you. God sent us a stranger. Keep the doors open. It'll be your turn someday. It always comes to somebody's turn. Eli Stroud. Pastor Ruth Ann read it aloud at the Red Education. She got to the part about the little girl who sang loud and stopped because she could not finish, because she was that little girl, and she had kept the promise for 50 years without ever once knowing the whole reason behind the man she made it to. Today the deed, the padlock, and the Reverend's letter sit in a glass case in the entryway of Mount Hebron Baptist Church, not a museum, the church itself, where every soul passes it walking to the pews. The card beside it, written by the congregation, reads, "On the 3rd Sunday of Advent, 1959, men came to padlock this church during worship over a debt of $1,100. When the bank refused payment of the debt, a stranger bought the land itself in the final minutes before foreclosure and deeded it back to the congregation, free and clear. He asked that his name never be recorded. We have honored that. God sent us a stranger. The doors have never closed since. No name. People ask. The members just point to that line and leave it there. A church knows how to keep a promise made to a man who asked for nothing. And every 3rd Sunday of Advent, they sing louder than a church that size has any business singing, loud enough to carry out to the road. That's on purpose. They're singing loud enough that wherever he is, he can hear it. A poor congregation built a church out of nickels and a 40-cent hen in 1931. 28 years later, men came to chain its doors during Advent, and when paying the debt didn't work, a stranger found the one window in a locked wall and bought the ground out from under them in 90 seconds, then gave it back. He never said his name. He never said he'd been baptized into that congregation in his mother's arms. He drove west and was gone, and left only a riddle about a hen and a promise that one day it'd be your turn. If this story reached you this morning, do me a favor. Pass it on. Share it with somebody who keeps the doors of something open when it'd be easier to let them close. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet. There are more Duke stories coming every night at midnight, and unfortunately, they don't make men like John Wayne anymore.